Professor Ramaswamy, who was, in manner of speaking, adopted son of Hyderabad, although he's now moved elsewhere. Professor Ramaswamy was the Vice Chancellor of Hyderabad Central University, 2011-16. Right now, after retirement from JNU, is visiting professor at IIT Delhi. He has had a illustrious career in the sciences in India and abroad. His education was in Madras University. I just realized that he was 1 year my senior in college in Loyola in Madras. Fortunate for that. And then IIT Kanpur, Princeton University. He was with the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, 83 to 86, I think. 86 to 2018 until he retired. He was at JNU. Of course, he had this stint in HCU here. He's worked in a variety of fields. I think theoretical chemistry is his main area, but also areas like computational biology. He will be speaking. He has been teaching. He has been in the field of administration as Vice Chancellor, so he has been very much part of the university system. He will be speaking today on the new education policy, which of course covers, from pre-primary to university education. But his focus would be on university education. And although the NEP is 2 years old, it still hogs the headlines in some respects. It has been controversial, it promises a lot. There's a certain lack of clarity, but there also a lot of hope held out, and I think Professor Ramaswamy will be able to, in some ways, put the discussion in a context.
To speak at Manthan. I was an adopted son, maybe Ram, but a somewhat prodigal one. I don't think I ever made it to a Manthan talk while I was here in Hyderabad, so it is a double pleasure to be here. I'd like to speak about the National Education Policy 2020, or the new education policy that we've had. Together, in a whimsical is probably the best description one could think of. There were few educationists in that panel. There was a very prominent technologist who was heading ISRO and so on, member of the Rajya Sabha. He was the head of it. There was a professor of Hindi and a few others. There was also an NRI, well-meaning and a Fields medalist, an extremely gifted man, but he was also part of this commission. And this commission put together a document which was then to chart out the course of action for India for the coming foreseeable future. So, if I could move to the next one, all right. In the past 35 years, or in the past 60 or 70 years, many of the basics of educational spending haven't changed that much in the country. We are not putting in as much money into it as even the Kothari Commission had recommended. And given the fact that our economy has really done rather well in the past, every so often, if you keep looking at the Sensex, it seems to be touching newer and crazier heights. But it does not translate into government expenditure on education. Even today, it's under 4% overall, and for higher education and research, it's actually well under 1%. Now, a general point, although people always talk about the GDP and how the well-being of a country is and its intellectual capacity is indexed by the GDP and so on, in our country the economy doesn't play that much of a role. It's not so dependent on the intellectual well-being of our body politic. And also the need as we can see you just take a look at at the structure of our society, there is a much greater need for education, both specific as in higher education as well as general as in the primary and secondary education. There's just a phenomenal need for more money to be put into this enterprise. Move to the next slide. Because of the way in which the NEP is structured, and I don't know how many of you might have had a chance to read the National Education Policy 2020. It's up on the website. It is just a dreadfully long and tiresome document in many ways. So I just would summarize some of the more important things which are germane to our discussion. It's loosely structured around the SDGs of the United Nations, these development goals that are there. And one of them, which is really germane to this discussion, is that achieving inclusive and quality education is an SDG. It's SDG 4 in the UN Development Program. And this goal is aimed to ensure that all children complete free primary and secondary education, by 2030. The word free, the gist of this paragraph is there in our NEP, but the word free is prominently left out. Because there is no way in which our government either is able to or intends to provide this kind of access to the general population. It's just, in a sense, it is not within within our organizational structure. It's difficult to do. But anyway, this is part of what is it. Okay, so that's the NEP. You can download it from the Ministry of Education website, and I took all the words in that document and I found out which are the ones that are more prominently used. I made a little word cloud out of it. And as you can see, what's very big is teachers. So there's a lot of emphasis on what teachers should do, could do, and so on. There's a lot on higher educational institutions. There is these HEIs, and there's a very prominent section on policies. All right, so policy this is a prescriptive document. Okay. All right, now as we know, or let me just reiterate, it was approved by the cabinet in July 2020. And July 2020 was after the first wave of COVID. There were few of us in universities, there were few of us out in public. It was a very difficult time for the country, but it was put through Parliament and approved and adopted. Now, there was a certain amount of discussion, but discussing something as fundamental as the NEP in a country as diverse as ours, at a time when communication was really restricted in more ways than one, did not allow for complete, free and frank discussion. Especially given the composition of this commission that did it. It did not have, very communicative people associated with it. So this kind of consultative process that one would have liked to have seen, and it's not a sense of, they didn't ask me to be there. It's not the point. They almost didn't ask anybody to be there. So it was, difficult to see where the inputs had gone. All right. The second thing was that, we adopted a fundamental educational change, a change in the structure of our education, because there was lots of changes, including, for example, a suggestion that we go from a 3-year undergraduate to a 4-year undergraduate, etc., etc. When it is done in the middle of a pandemic, and it wasn't at all clear what the effect of the pandemic was going to be. There was the first wave. As we all know, the second wave was significantly worse than the first. Education just went into a downward spiral, and all of us have got friends and family who were in the educational process at that time. So we know that the process of education had actually fundamentally altered in the past 3 years. And to adopt something as basic as as a national policy was probably not as wise as one would have expected. I will not be talking about school education because that is a complete chapter in itself, and I honestly don't have the feel for it. What I do know something about is higher education, having taught in universities all my life, so let me just describe what the NEP. I will interchangeably say National Education Policy or New Education Policy or just NEP. But this NEP has decided, in a sense, that the university needs to change. The nature of the university needs to change. And a lot of it is, the motivations are unclear, but what the NEP wants is large multidisciplinary universities where a range of subjects are taught, unlike our educational system today, which has upwards of 700 universities of various kinds. We have, as you know, central universities, state universities. We have institutions that are deemed to be universities. We have a lot of private universities, and the landscape is variegated in that sense. All right? So what the NEP says is that what we really need is large multidisciplinary universities, many of them, and these are to provide interdisciplinary education at the undergraduate level, revamped curricula, etc., etc. The funding is going to be governed by a national research foundation along the lines of the US National Science Foundation or other bodies. And this governance structure of higher education is going to be determined by that. All right? And they would like to increase access and equity through a variety of means. These higher educational institutions are to become multidisciplinary hubs, and what people don't always appreciate about our universities is that most of our universities do not allow all possible disciplines. There's only one or two universities in our country where all subjects are taught. One or two could expand to maybe 5 or so, but something like a single campus institution which allows all disciplines, there is only one, that is Banaras Hindu University. And perhaps to some extent Aligarh Muslim University, where all subjects from medicine, law, all various other disciplines are all taught, arts, sciences, humanities, and so on. Universities like the University of Hyderabad, for example, do not have medicine. They don't have law. There's a whole range of there's no engineering. So range of disciplines is just left out. So the NEP says this is not a good thing, but every institution should be multidisciplinary and should have a range of subjects. Okay? In fact, they've gone to the extent of calling them MERUs. You know that there is a preoccupation with finding nice acronyms. So the MERU is a multidisciplinary education and research university in this new imagination. We have been used to the University Grants Commission as the one point for going and complaining about money and so on and so forth. But now the Higher Education Commission of India, HECI, will regulate all these various functions There's supposed to be the Education Regulatory Council, an Accreditation Council, a Higher Education Grants Council, and the General Education Council, etc. for standards. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah. This is all part of the promised land, because nothing has yet actually been put in place on this front so far. Okay. A matter of some concern for higher education institutions is research funding. And as in the last the finance minister in the last budget announced the setting up of a 50,000 crore grant for the NRF. Okay. So the National Research Foundation will have 50,000 crores in principle. And what is not clear is whether other funding bodies are going to continue or whether they will be absorbed into this larger superstructure. So this is meant to fund research in a competitive, peer-reviewed manner, in a very Western model. It will facilitate research at academic institutions and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the thing. Next one. All right. Words that are used quite frequently in this document include the word holism. So education is supposed to be all rounded out, structured, reimagined, redone. The next one. Okay. One issue which dogs us in the educational business is the following. Students come in expecting to graduate after a certain amount of time with a certain degree. If for any reason they are unable to do so, they essentially have wasted N years of their life if they are not able to get out with that particular degree. So one of the interesting and suggestions that this NEP has made is that there should be several exit options, so that, for instance, if a student came in to do a bachelor's degree, after a year, for whatever reasons, if they had to leave, they could leave with a certificate. After 2 years, if they could not complete within complete the requirements, and they chose to leave after 2 years, they'd get a diploma. If they left after 3 years, they'd get the bachelor's, and if they left after 4 years, they will get the bachelor's with honors or something like that. All right. So this kind of multiple entry and multiple exit options is something which is intended to provide the student a lot of flexibility. And this flexibility will translate into essentially doing away with a master's program. You could go from a bachelor's with 4 years of a bachelor's to a PhD, which would be, which is on the face of it something interesting. The second feature, which is now being set up, is the so-called academic bank of credit. Okay, so a student enters the university system with 0 credits to his or her account. You do a course, let's say at University of Hyderabad, you spend a semester and you get some 4 courses, you get those entered into this bank, and then you, again, for reasons that are personal to you, decide to move to Delhi. You can go to Delhi University, show them your bank passbook, you've got your 4 credits from Hyderabad, and so on and so forth. And then through a process which is yet to be decided, after you've finished this required number of credits, which can be at various institutions, you get your degree in your bachelor's or your master's or whatever it is, you get it. So this ABC, or this academic bank of credit, is your passport to a degree, right? Now, in a perfect world, this has a lot of merit, but as I will point out and I'll show you a little later, this has actually a lot of practical problems, although our government is now insisting that everybody subscribe to this ABC or else. Okay, the next one. All right. There's a whole lot about financial assistance for students who need it. The document goes into a fair amount of discussion on that, because one of the other themes that becomes apparent is that it's going to this NEP needs the strong participation of private parties. Education at the scale that we need in our country is not going to be available only through governmental institutions. It has to need participation from private parties. So in addition to the governmental HEIs, there's going to be a large number of privately funded and privately funding HEIs. But a little more on that later. Okay, move on. There is acknowledgement of the fact that we need to internationalize our education, get more students from other countries to come in and study here. Just in the way we export so many students, we should also probably try to import. And I believe actually that this is a good thing, in particular if we were to open up our doors to our neighboring countries. There is a real opportunity for India to not just to educate our neighbors, but also the soft diplomacy of doing good in the neighborhood. Next one. Right. Among the most strange, just the coincidence of times, the NEP prior to the pandemic had gone on at great length about online education, because again, in a country as big as ours, it's not going to be possible to build all the institutions that we need. So they had gone into some detail about online education and how to ensure that online education would reach a large number of people. So they did realize that there is a requirement of infrastructure, and I mean there's some details over here. We already have online lectures through what's called the Swayam platform. There is the NPTEL of IIT Madras and so on and so forth. But if you move on, next, yeah. One of the big problems that we have is that content creation, actual lectures in all subjects is not available. What had been done prior to the pandemic was that many teachers allowed themselves to be filmed while they were taking classes, and that was put up as online content, which is not the same as online teaching, as we all realized during the pandemic. I had the absolute misfortune, and I know there are colleagues of mine over here who also had to teach during the pandemic, and there is nothing worse than having your world shrunk to a 15-inch screen or a little cell phone or whatever. And that actually meant that many of the things that were written about online education in the NEP are simply not, they're not even relevant anymore. Move on. Okay. The other thing that the NEP does not acknowledge explicitly is just how difficult it is to do practicals via something like an online medium. It's not just surgery or something dramatic like that. Even ordinary things like running a physics or a chemistry lab or whatever is just very, very difficult, and neither have we thought deeply about it, nor are there easy solutions. So, and that actually came to light during the pandemic. In bizarre ways, it became apparent. All right. So, a large part of the online education space was willy-nilly meant to go for more theoretical subjects. In a country where we need really people to work with their hands a lot more, to go on for more theoretical approaches to subjects is, to say the least, a little retrogressive. But anyway, to the next one. Right. In general, like I said, that we have a new policy coming after 35 years is a cause for some amount of optimism. And one can see that there are lots of opportunities that in principle can be available, or we can turn many of these things into positives, because the fact together does remain that we are a hugely unequal society that requires to become a little more equal, or much more equal. And the only way in which we really know how to do this is through education, through giving opportunities to everybody in the society. There is a number that is bandied about. It's called the gross enrollment ratio, and you need this GER to be, in the most advanced countries, is about 50%, which is to say that half of everybody who can go to college or to university should be able to go to. Right now in our country, it's anywhere from 25% to 30%. That's where it is in our country. But I think that this number hides a lot of things. It hides a lot of substandard education. It also hides a lot of inequalities, regional inequalities in the country. So this is probably an inadequate summary of the NEP, and I will come back to little bits and pieces of it more. But there are opportunities to be seen. And so actually my title, The Promised Land, was not so much tongue-in-cheek as I think that we have a chance to do something if we acknowledge that there is a gap. But there are concerns which already became apparent in the 2 years that have passed, and they have become apparent in the 2 years that have passed since this bill was adopted in Parliament. All right? Partly because a large number of institutions have already started restructuring themselves, keeping this NEP in mind. All right. One of the things that I don't know how you view it, but I really feel that there's been a sort of a collective amnesia on the lockdown and the pandemics. It's like one has forgotten what it was like, because everything is back to normal. I mean, whatever the old normal was, our roads are as crowded, our buses, in fact, they are more crowded. A variety of things have happened, and we have not corrected the basic flaws in our infrastructure. If there were to be another wave, and everyone keeps promising us that Omicron 2 is somewhere around the corner, we will still have no option but to close everything down and go home, or whatever it is that institutions did. So there is this amnesia which is a little unfortunate, because not that we should be preparing for more and more pandemics, but whatever the advantages that we had from a situation like the pandemic, those seem to be forgotten. In particular, the digital divide that was really critical during the period of the pandemic. You may have all your lectures online, but if your students cannot access you either because they don't have enough bandwidth, digital bandwidth, or they don't have electric power, there is not much use. One of the other things that we realized during our teaching programs was that in a family, sometimes there are 3 or 4 school and college going children, and there are not 3 or 4 devices on which you can be communicating. So we really have to do something about addressing those kinds of inequalities that are there. The infrastructure needs to be really augmented, and if you're going to teach online, then both those words are important. It's not just that you're teaching anyhow and it's online. You have to actually learn how to instruct online, because it's not, teacher after teacher will tell you the same thing. I miss this eye-to-eye contact, I just don't feel the same way about teaching, and the students will tell you the same thing. In a class, sir, you are, whatever, 5 feet, whatever, 5, 6, and you're so big. But, finally, when I have to watch you on this cell phone, you are so small. And the so small goes with its own caveats. We've really not addressed this issue of how does one effectively communicate, what is effective online pedagogy. And this is a problem for us. Next. Okay. In the 2 years when people have looked at this document in threadbare detail, what is pretty apparent is that it's a very prescriptive document. It tells you what should be done. It tells you that it is good for every institution to have all subjects. What is practical, what is not practical, it doesn't tell you anything about how this is to be achieved. And so the several suggestions and directives it gives for different aspects of higher education, all engineers should learn sociology, all sociologists should learn some technology, all technologists should learn some fine arts. All very well to say is a prescriptive document, but it doesn't spell out how any of this is to be done. To give you an example, we are in 2022. By 2030, every higher education institution is supposed to become multidisciplinary. To introduce one program in one university, it takes at least 2 years of discussion. Now, if you're going to go, if you have to open a medical school in, let's say, the University of Hyderabad, which I know well, and Professor Hari Babu, who's also been part of the administration, we did try to get a medical college in the university. The money is one part of it, but the rest of the permissions, it will just take a very long time. So how do you get all of them to be multidisciplinary? Not just one, but every higher education institution is to become multidisciplinary. By 2040, the enrollment has to be in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, if we have to achieve that goal. How this is to be done is not made clear, but more importantly, regardless of the kind of institution, governmental involvement is going to be minimal. You're not going to get the money from the government, you're not going to be able to get whatever else you might need. It's not the government's job, it is the institution's job. See, today our gross enrollment ratio, including vocational education, is 26%. How are we going to get this to 50% by 2035? It's, again, not at all clear. Because, to give you an example, again from the University of Hyderabad, today the enrollment stands at maybe 6,000, some number like this. In 1974, when it started, it was 2,000. So, it's gone from 2 to 6,000 in 40 years. Well, good luck. Okay, next slide. Right. Okay. I used to be a great votary of online education because it was it was just a what else can we do kind of an approach, because at least we knew that there had been deep cell phone penetration in the country, bandwidth was available in many places, but after going, especially the pandemic has been it's been a big teaching experience. It's taught me a lot of things about actual access, because there are parts of our country where, forget about 5G, there are parts of our country where you have 5G. There's also parts of the country where you don't have 4, or you don't have 3, and depending on the season, you may have 2G connectivity. How does one communicate? How does one even treat all this on an equal footing? It is difficult. Okay. One thing that we have noticed across the world is that students who are coming into higher education now are actually poorer prepared than no, they're not than we were when we went to college, but even just say prior to the pandemic, the students were in a sense better prepared because they had also figured out socialization. They were learning socialization, let's say, in practice. They were out of their homes, so they were experiencing independence, again in practice. And they were making choices, career choices, whatever. They were learning from their peers. The pandemic took all this away from all of us. I mean, of course, it took away many other things also, but in the teaching space, the students who are coming in today are poorer socialized, much less independent, and more timid because they're not quite sure of how how things are going to turn out. All right. So, online education, I'm not. I'm willing to relearn or re-look at the situation from my own perspective. I used to be a great votary of online and distance education because I felt that it gave control to the learner, sort of a degree of autonomy in learning. I'm not so sure about that. Okay. The other thing is that one thing is that we also realized in this period of isolation is that the campus is it's a very important learning space. When students and all of us have, in an audience like this, everyone has had some time at a campus, whether as a day scholar or as not. It is a place where a lot of independence is acquired. It's a safe space for learning, and especially for women and other marginalized groups, it is a place where people come into their own. So removal of this is a feature which may not be as desirable. When you're trying to ramp up the numbers to reach your required gross enrollment ratio, it doesn't have the same effect as having campus or at least some kind of a secluded space for education. I think the importance of that has not completely been appreciated. I don't think it's just my failing in this. I think in general policies that emphasize a lot of online education don't realize that getting away from the home is an important part of the education. Right. The biggest learning point has been implementability. We've just learned that it is so difficult to implement the NEP in practice. I now am at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. After having lived most of my life in university space, I am now part of an institution which is very firmly committed to this management of education along certain lines to make sure that people graduate in 4 years and so on and so forth. Even within a well-defined and well-structured educational system, it turns out that it is actually very difficult to implement some of the prescriptions of the NEP. In particular, this multiple entry, multiple exit business. If you are admitted ostensibly for a 4-year bachelor's in civil engineering, what can you get out with in 1 year? You can't get a certificate in civil engineering because, strangely enough, you may never have a civil engineering course in your first year. If you are admitted for a 4-year undergraduate in engineering physics, it doesn't even make sense to have a certificate in engineering physics because you are neither an engineer nor a physicist, and a certificate could well mean nothing. A diploma. So the point I'm trying to make is that wanting to have multiple entries and multiple exits must have defined goals of educational goals at the 2-year, at the 1-year level, at the 2-year level, and so on, which in some disciplines it's simply not possible, or the kind of change that we are going to have to bring is very, very drastic. Many institutions now have these integrated bachelor's and master's programs. in a variety of disciplines. Let's say if you take one in the sciences, in the first year, everybody is taught physics, chemistry, maths, biology, geology, all together equally well. In the second year, maybe if you are going to be a physics major, you'll take one more course in physics or something like that. That's the existing structure. There's nothing you can give them after 1 year. There's nothing you can give them after 2 years. That's one part of it. The second part is that when you've got a high, when you've got something like the IITs, with lakhs of students write the exam and a few thousand are chosen. It's not clear that you will allow, if you're going to allow them to exit, you've also got to allow people to enter. Who do you allow to enter the IIT system and then say that I am on par with? So this in a very strange way devalues both the admission process and the education at one fell swoop. It just becomes very difficult. The other part which I found a little amusing, but I mean it again teaches you that after 60 years of the IITs in India, even the 5 old IITs, that is Delhi, Madras, Bombay, Kanpur and Kharagpur, you cannot transfer credits from one to the other. Sometimes for very silly reasons. A credit in IIT Delhi means 1 hour of instruction. In Bombay, it means 2 hours of instruction. In Chennai, in Madras, it could be some other norm. So the credits don't mean anything. They're not transferable easily. So the practical implementation of this academic bank of credits is not possible even within a single monolithic IIT system. And what to say of transferring credits between Osmania and ISB or Triple IT and Delhi University or what have you. All this is just a logistical nightmare which is not possible to solve by writing another policy paper. Because at the end of it, there are students whose lives, in a sense, depend on it, and their entire educational structure has been fashioned around the possibility of these choices. So these are actually very difficult, and they're actually not easy to solve in any planned universe. Next one. Okay, so this is one of the things that in a pluralistic country like ours, it's important to remember that tradition is really important. Universities are not built in a day, not even in a generation, not even in 2. There is an academic tradition that we all require to be respected because we build incrementally upon the achievements of the past. Whether it is in the social sciences or in the sciences or whatever, everything really depends on a sense of continuity. The NEP, for reasons that I don't fully understand, I honestly don't actually understand it, dwells a lot on traditional Indian education and traditional Indian, some glorious past. And it's centered around accomplishments which are part reality, part myth, for which the evidence is scanty. And there is a problem. I'll quote the exact passages from the NEP which appeal to this past. And the second part, which I am as much a victim of as anybody else, is that the colonial baggage we all carry is very, very heavy. Not to make too fine a point of it, if we think of India as being 75 or let's say 100 years, or if we think of India as being even going back to Vedic times, is 4,000 years. Humanity itself is arguably 50,000 years. All of humanity that we have, all Homo sapiens, anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 years. That is the history of the human race. The history of the nation is such a inconsequential little fragment of this entire history that to me it seems unnecessary to harp upon, quote unquote, an Indian history. Without any sense of irony or what have you. I mean, I think of we are all Platonic. We are also descendants of Socrates and Plato. This way of argumentation, this way of discussion comes from a great tradition that is common to all of us. Whether we are identifiably, whether we look like them or not is hardly the point. No, I say this because what is it that defines what is our past? Is it only something that happened in geographical what? Did it happen in, south of the Himalayas, south of the Vindhyas? Did it happen in the region of Hyderabad? To me, to go on about Vedic science or Vedic this or Vedic that, and to not acknowledge that great philosophers and great traditionalists, our writing didn't spawn over here. Our writing came from somewhere else. Our languages came from somewhere else. So, I say this because the next slide, there is a guiding light in the NEP. And because the print is a little small, I will just read out that the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought has been a guiding light for this policy. The pursuit of knowledge, jnana, wisdom, pragya, and truth, satya, was always considered Indian thought and philosophy as the highest human goal. The aim of education in ancient India was not just the acquisition of knowledge as presentation or as preparation for life in this world or life beyond schooling, but for the complete realization and liberation of the self. And it goes on to quote philosophers that we are taught have been in our tradition, but also mythic characters for whom there is no particular there is scanty evidence, I would say. I have as much respect for tradition as anybody else, but this is a national education policy and it should address the needs of the nation. The next slide, please. I did find this a little disturbing that in this coming month, the Indian Science Research ISRO, whatever that expands to, and Vigyan Bharati will host an ancient science conference on Akash Tattva to expose the youth of India to the wisdoms of ancient science along with modern scientific advancement. I am as much for acknowledging the contributions of our predecessors as anybody else, but at this point in time, it seems a little difficult. Move on. Among the more distressing things that we have witnessed in the recent past is the gradual eroding of our public institutions, in particular the Jawaharlal Nehru University, where I does remember, and many similar institutions have had to face a sort of an unsavory public battle, both in the news media, in movies, and as you know, I have a colleague from JNU over here, but more generally, public institutions have been weakened in the past decade, right? And they've been weakened for a variety of reasons. I'm willing to acknowledge that they have not delivered as much as they should have or as they could have, but they've been weakened structurally by two things. One is by funds crunch. And I'll come to that momentarily. as well as a sort of a constant battle between the university intellectuals and the outside world. Right? At the same time, private universities, many of them are flourishing, and then they should, right? Because they will deliver, or they have more of a potential to deliver at this time the kind of education and the volume of education that is required in our country. But will this have the desired outcome? Because education as an investment opportunity and education as a means of providing social change are two slightly different things. Now, the responsibility for much public education is given over to private institutions, and they will determine not only what is taught, but how and where. Meaning that very few private universities are going to be opening up to teach philosophy or fine arts or something like that. Right now, the private university space seems to be concentrating a lot on liberal education, whatever that means. This is, the public institutions have not delivered as well as they should have, acknowledged, but also that there are policies that are designed to make public institutions somewhat weaker than they need to be. Instead of strengthening the public university, every move is made to somehow undermine them. And having been at the university administration for some time, I know that central control is really very, very stultifying. It does not allow autonomy. Doesn't allow true autonomy to start with, but it also it's a way of control and keeping you in line, especially when you link it to funding. Right? So, next. The NEP does say something about private higher education institutions, but it's not very, very clear about the fee structure. So allowing a lot of private higher educational institutions to operate without at least controlling the kind of fee structure that they have could lead to some very, it could exacerbate inequality more than it actually is already. So I've now told you what the NEP contains. I've also told you what I think some of the drawbacks are, but not to be too overly pessimistic, I feel that there is a way forward. And in short, it is this. I think it's necessary for us to recognize, and by us I really mean us, that education is something that we do for the well-being of our society. It's not something that is given to us. Again, the colonial baggage needs to go. It's not something that is being given to us. In a way, I believe that education is a community's expression of its own investment in the future. So in short, I really feel that we need to take back control. The central government, this or any other government which comes, is not going to be in a position to fund education at the level that it needs. What it can do, what it should do, lots of things, you can write reams about it. But when we live in a society, we really know, if we apply our minds to it, what does this community need? We know the demographics, we know the people around us, we know who lives here, we know what has to be done. And we know how much that needs to be invested. It's therefore imperative, in my opinion, that states need to invest in public education by strengthening the state university system. Let's leave the center out of it. Again, this is the promised land, it's an ideal world, so this is what I would like to see a little more of, is that the states realize that it is in our own best interest to invest in education here. central institutions, especially those that have this wonderful label of Institute of National Importance and stuff like that, they come with far too many strings attached. And they do not serve the purpose in the numbers that we need. So, especially when the idea of federalism itself is in question, I think we need to be more self-reliant at the state level. I'm again just stating, as I said, that education is a local, it's a local imperative. At some point, the Indian Academies of Science did a sort of a review of this NEP and wrote in a very heartfelt message to the minister that we have considered all these things and here we have some suggestions. So one that I would like to just read out to you is, like health, education is a heavily decentralized domain, and a top-down approach of legislating policies is unlikely to gain traction in the country with its varied ecosystems for education. Moreover, education is on the concurrent list, and as such, prescriptions for overarching and highly centralized national-level regulatory bodies would need due diligence in respect of involvement of states in the spirit of federalism. Okay, the draft NEP was only available in Hindi, so they have a comment on that. But this is not my comment. This is a comment from the Academies of Science, and it was sent to the minister well in time for his consideration. Okay. Just to underscore this point, 2 days ago there was a news item. The Vice Chancellor of Jadavpur University said that there is no money from the center. There's also no money from the state. So he's turned to the alumni. And in a very heartfelt message, he says that government funding, state and central, is becoming extremely inadequate for JU, Jadavpur University. I appeal to you to mobilize financial support for the university to enable it to maintain and improve the infrastructure and strengthen our ability to compete, etc., etc. So it will come to this in many, many institutions if we are not more diligent and we do not ask or we do not take cognizance at the local level. And with that, let me conclude. Thank you for your attention.
Really analyzed what this NEP is all about, and I'm sure there are many questions. I was just Googling on something, on one of the many schemes which the government had. This scheme is called e-Vidya, and they want to disseminate classes electronically to 18,000 schools across the country this year. They've allocated 1 lakh for it. So obviously there is a distance between what they were saying, what they can do, and what they actually mean when they read the document. I think this NEP is one example of that.
Yeah.
I also suspect that you think that Pushpak Viman is not a real.
Concern is about the exits. We try to stop children from exiting. So if you have, after 1 year, you can exit, or after 2 years. And most of my students were first generation learners, and boys and girls. Very difficult to hold them. Now, if they say after 1 year, girls especially, they'll say you get a certificate, get married. So from home, there will be pressure. So that is something that I was very worried about when I read that. My daughter was working in St. Francis, which is supposed to be very elite, but even there are girls whose parents keep telling them, तुम्हारे पर out rate card देनी चाहिए, शादी कर देनी चाहिए. So after 1 year, 2 years, if there's going to be some certificate given, I fear there will be more dropouts than students on roll. If you're thinking of increasing, I don't think it's going to happen. If you're talking only about the elite, maybe it works. But it will not work even in elite systems for women who are always in a pressure to hang on to whatever opportunities they get. They'll forever being pushed. Anyway, you're going to get a diploma. Anyway, you're going to get something else.
Yeah.
That is my major concern.
No, it is also, it is an unstated concern over here, in the sense that when I talked about the non-implementability of something like this, the aim, it is this that we are talking about. You know, if you, first of all, under pressure, people will give a certificate because the student is, in a sense, you know, the student can go to court tomorrow and say, I want to exit, this institution is not giving me an exit certificate if you don't do it. At the same time, like I told you with this absurd example of, you know, civil engineering, what can that certificate possibly mean? But the third thing is, there could be pressure saying that, look, you can take a certificate now, come back 2 years later and go for a diploma, and come back 5 years later and go for a degree. All of it will not work, right? So we are likely to have a lot of misuse, not in some sort of strange way, but, you know, they could use, using it for lateral entry to go from a lower prestige institution to a higher prestige institution is one thing. But the concern that ma'am has just pointed out, that there could be a lot of pressure that comes from a parent saying that, you know, you had 1 year of college, enough. Or if you are from a lower socio-economic group, you say, look, we can only afford 1 year of college for you. After this, you earn and you can go to college if you like. You know, that kind of business. I sort of alluded to that in saying that this is a safe space for people to learn. You know, that the universities provide a learning space and a learning opportunity which could get eroded easily.
To the Tier 2, Tier 3 institutions, when we look at it, the quality is diminishing. The quality is diminishing, and top of it, there's not much of R&D projects like research and development going on, except like IITs or NITs. When you look at the Tier 3, Tier 4 institutions, at the same time, for bachelor's, master's, engineering, or whatever stream is it, even if you take ITIs or diploma courses, not much of hands-on experience is there. The quality is very, very not up to the standards. Not even in some places they're below average. What is the way where it can be improved, the quality?
I believe, and I feel that this is necessary for us to do, is that unless the community gets involved, where are you going to ensure standards? See, we all would like, as we have seen, I'm sure it's true in Hyderabad as well, that school education, we spend a lot of our energy on making sure that our children go to very good schools. We are willing to pay at least 4,000, 5,000 rupees a month for them to go to school. We go to parent-teachers meetings. We worry about whether they are learning properly or not. We invest a lot of ourselves in that part of the education. Strangely enough, when it comes to college, we are not even surprised if college costs only 50 rupees a month. You know, a tenth of what a school education would cost. There is no such thing as a parent-teacher forum for you to participate, but our actual involvement is very, very limited. My modest proposal towards the end is really to say that, look, we need to get back into a little more hands-on. I mean, I'm not entirely clear as to how one would do it, but I think the time has come for us to be a little more involved in this educational process, even for higher education. Not we want to police this and police that, but we need to, demand that our local college provides good education. I don't see any other way out of it, because if you have legislated fund, from the top, it will become another thing to get around and get over. All right? I'm sorry if this is an inadequate response, but this is what I feel.
Each university was established by an act of parliament. Similarly, state universities were established by state legislations. They have some set of statutes, set of kind of jurisdictional issues, right? That this university can only cater to this region and so on. Given this, how is this seamless mobility of students going to be possible? The NEP says there must be seamless movement of students from one institution to another institution across the country. Now, if this is the way in which universities were established, where they have serious jurisdictional issues, they have different kind of sets of statutes. How is this mobility possible? Right? At that stage, at that level, we should bring about changes in the university, and that has to be done by a policy. Each university, universities by themselves cannot do it. There must be some policy initiative at that level.
True.
And the second point I would like to mention is, see, when you talk of the multiple exits, multiple entries, see, there must be, as you said, rightly said, goals of this different levels, right? So in order to set up some goals, we must involve stakeholders, right? The industry must be involved, the academic institution must be involved, educationists must be involved. Whole lot of people who are concerned with education must be involved in the discussion and see what can be done at different levels and what kind of a certification can be given at different levels and for what purpose.
What can be addressed. But my point was that even within a monolithic IIT system, it's not possible to address all of them because things don't mean the same. So the difficulties only get multiplied.
Observation, then my question. My observation is that in fine arts, while not universities, but a lot of institutions are there, at least half a dozen in Hyderabad, backed by the different film studios, and also others like Hunstech and RIFTI and FTIH, a lot of other institutes which are teaching regarding filmmaking, photography and interior design, etc. I don't know how valuable their certificates are, as they are not recognized by UGC, etc. But in that fine art space, you are wondering, but there are a lot of private institutes. That's the observation. The question is, I would like to see, your tone was very gentle, but I didn't find much positive about the NEP from you. But in my own case, 2 years back, I would not have, my undergraduation is in fine arts, a BFA in photography. So I would never get a seat in, say, psychology 2 years back. Now I can. So don't you see anything positive in this? Because one of the things before, irrespective of which government was there, we used to admire in the family circle, friend circle, we used to admire the American universities that they encourage you to study even at 60, 70, whatever, and also multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary studies. So do you find anything that is positive in this, okay, other than the mythification or the saffronization, whatever, those things, but...
No. It's very important to review education from time to time. It's necessary to do these things. But, the stakeholder, that is you and me, somehow the practicalities of actually, you see, who needs education the most? People who leave school and go into higher education, that is really the target group. And what is the purpose of this education? Without any frills, it is to have a job and to have a livelihood. So if you can provide any prescription whereby you can get a livelihood after 3 years or 4 years of education, I am all for it. What I'm a little less admiring of is a lot of description about how wonderful multidisciplinary education is going to be, how this is going to be. All this is fine, but where are either the jobs or these exit options? What does it enable you to do? It doesn't seem to be actually practically implementable. That was the point. And if you've been in any system, you realize that change is always a good thing. All right? It is required for us to change your point of view, change your prejudices. So it's not that I should also correct, I felt a little not negative, I feel that to enunciate religious principles as the guiding light for an education document in a country which, at least on paper, is secular, is probably going just a little far. I would much rather that we had left that part of it out, but there are many positive things in the NEP if we know how to implement them.
Vague policy, yeah. So, and the central government has no interest in essentially supporting any of this. They will not be providing any funding or structure, which means the private sector has to provide the structure and services for this.
And my appeal is that the states should step in where the center has not.
Yes, that too. And also, but the thing is, like, if the states also not interested in providing any kind of support for this, so the private sector, they're only interested in making money, which means they're going to drive up the cost of education, even if it's a certificate or a diploma or a degree. So let's say like one person, they somehow manage to get the funding and they pay up the money and they get their certificate or diploma, whatever they want. So after all this effort and they get the certification, what's the value of the certification? Like, will it be accepted locally? Will that person be able to get a job internationally? What's the value of such an expensive education? What's the point of it?
That every educational institution should allow multiple entries and multiple exits. How, in order to comply, we will give there is no institution that can afford to say no. Let's put it very bluntly. Institutions are not going to be able to turn around and say no, because there will be other ways of keeping, there are policies, right? At the end of it, you will get something which may be worth the paper it's written on, but not much more than that.
The last 30 years at various institutions. One major point you missed in the national policy was that at the degree level when we are entering, now it is only BZC or BA Fine Arts or etc. Now we can take any subject. I can take BA Physics. With Physics I can take photography. With photography, 3 subjects I can choose, which is not there earlier. That I think I probably missed. The second thing, sir, regarding this state and center, till 1976 with the 42nd amendment, state education from state was pushed to the concurrent list. And concurrent list doesn't necessarily mean that the states are overtaken. Central government has also got a policy of taking decisions. That's why all the central universities have come. Now, in the present scenario, after the NEP came into picture, 6 states, Telangana, West Bengal, Uttarakhand, Meghalaya, and one more state, they have also formed their own NEP policies, and they're working out or in the structure which is going to Kerala. These 6 states have already have been on record, and they are coming in with it. At no point, I think, will there be a conflict between the state and center. That's one thing I'd like to tell you. With regard to the online structure, about 4 days a week, I stay in a village which is exactly 120 kilometers from Hyderabad, where there is very good connectivity. In fact, the school children about 8 to 9 years know better how to operate a phone or iPad than me. So connectivity in future will definitely come. So this policy is not singularly that we are going to take over the existing system or change. Even if you see the GER ratio from present 26.5%, I think it is in 2035 it is going to be 50%. It is going to be gradual, and so is the online system, which is going to be gradual, and not that the Usman University doors will be shut from tomorrow.
Negative about all these without a particular reason. I wasn't talking about connectivity in Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. I'm also talking about the connectivity in Arunachal Pradesh, where I was last week. The country is a big country, and we need to worry about the infrastructure. My only point was that once, the part of amnesia is that once you've solved your problem for yourself and your family, it's all over. It isn't. This country is a large country, and these policies are central policies. So that is why my feeling is that if more states like Kerala took over the job of formulating their own NEPs, it would be a much more local realization of what they need. They may or may not be in conflict with the NEP. The NEP is a prescriptive document. It doesn't actually say anything much more.
I wanted to ask you if the NEP actually addresses employability of students after their degree?
Not at all.
Because I think that's a huge issue we have here.
No, but it's an education policy. It just says that you must educate in the following way. It doesn't say whether these people are going to be employed or not. It doesn't, they wouldn't even know how to do it.
Okay.
In the beginning you said it should be increased to 6% of GDP. That is the first issue they should keep in mind. Second is, it is very essential for a country like India to bring in free education for girls up to intermediate at least.
Not just girls, boys also.
Well, it should be, because the 2 things that give greatest return to any economy in the world are, one is education and another is health. What I feel is that The government is also trying to see some people get some 1-year course, they get some credits, and then they will use this as a lateral entry to some institutions. An institution led by scientists will be, for that the chairman will be somebody who is 1-year course in some other subject. That is what I feel they are doing.
Sir, after 75 years of the independence, can we did not created a university of below 100 ranking, and there was an initiative by that this government to at least of some universities, and they are think 400,000 crores for some of these, but there is no action. What was the reason behind that lagging of we could not able to know? And is that a teaching is a different in foreign countries of top universities than India? And the other part is many universities of high ranking have endowment give back from this alumni, whereas it is missing. Even though in IITs government is subsidizing for each student 2.5 lakhs, 3 lakhs, but they go back and they send to their families. Is there the culture of giving back to the is missing in our brought up, or what you see the reason behind it?
Yeah. There
are conspiracies against our country.
See, there is a very good reason why we don't do well in the international rankings. Because international rankings are determined by a somewhat straightforward process of getting certain amount of marks on various pointers, and in some of these pointers the nature of our education is such that we cannot get any marks. How many foreign faculty do you have? How many foreign students do you have? What is the number of subjects that is taught in your university? These are various points on, or various facets on which we don't get very high number of marks, because in all governmental institutions you must have all faculty who are of Indian origin or PIOs. You don't give permanent jobs to foreign faculty. So in a sense it's a lost game if you want to fight that particular rankings. The second thing is that our educational system is not necessarily, the aim of our educational system is to educate us. The aim of rankings is to attract people into certain universities, because if Harvard has a bigger ranking than Princeton or Yale, more students will rush to go to Harvard, they will earn more money. That is not the same thing over here. Here we really want to educate large numbers of people. And of course it's nice to go to a well-ranked university, but for many people, especially the first generation learners who are the bulk of our population, any education is better than none. So I personally feel, having been at University of Hyderabad, which is within our system a highly ranked one, but it will never rank anywhere in the world rankings, because we don't have medicine, we don't have law. We just don't have the breadth of subjects that allow us to compete in that space. So let's not get into the ranking business, and let's just ask, why are we educating people? What is the purpose of our universities? Our purpose should be really to educate us.
No, I have a question. What did China do right in the last 30 years that there was a surge in research and peer-reviewed papers? And how come we are not able to reproduce that? Isn't that because of centers, central China investing in higher education?
Absolutely. The kind of money that China puts into higher education has just got to be seen to be believed. They do wrong things also. They pay you for every research publication. And that means that, Chinese authors are flooding every journal in the world with papers, including many Indian journals. All right? But without money, you will not get anything, and that goes for infrastructure, that goes for buildings, that goes for laboratories, that also goes for education. Namely, they take a bunch of students and send them abroad for education and bring them back. You see, for them this is a very high investment, high opportunity area. And they have a lot of translational research. Just before the pandemic, a small university in a place called Qingdao in China invited about 150 academics from all over the world, many from India, invited all of them to come and set up laboratories, and they were assured $1 million over 5 years. Personal salary, in addition to whatever money was required for the laboratory. Right? Many people were tempted. I mean, there were some from India, Brazil, Europe, America, and so on and so forth. Many people go. The number of foreign academics of high standing in China has got to be seen to be believed. We do not have that level of academic coming here, willing to come and spend 5 years over here. First of all, we don't give them $1 million, but on the other hand, we don't offer them the additional stuff, which is good students, lots of money for research, and so on and so forth. So, China is very aggressive. I'm not admiring of their strategies because it also goes with other policies at the country level. I mean, it's not possible to do that over here, and even if it were possible, I'm not sure that I would be completely supportive of it.
You have talked about objective of this new education policy, and in that you talked about colonial baggages. We have been vocal against Macaulay documents, Macaulay education policy. So now this is a new education policy. So they are changing in, they are changing in geographical sector. Means earlier it was Western philosophy of thinking, and now they are making it more Indianization. So there is only change in geographical sector in the conditioning of our mind by the education. So is there only geographical area is concerned for the conditioning of our mind, or is there no need of any kind of geographical, or education itself is the reason for the conditioning of our mind?
I mean, if I understand what you're trying to get at over here geographically, sab hamare purvajon hain. Whether it is Socrates or Plato or whoever, they are as much part of our history. So let's not just confine ourselves to a small geographical region. Our past is our past, and we have to build on it to go in the future.
How inclusive the policy is, because you have mentioned it prescribes many things for teachers. So does it mention the inclusivity for people from different castes, gender, and other factors from the socio-economic background?
It doesn't actually prescribe that kind of inclusivity, although it says it should be an inclusive and accessible one. So the words access, equity are used frequently in the document, but it doesn't actually tell you how to achieve it. See, that is a social reality that we live with, which is above and beyond what education policy. See, the education policy should really address itself to what should be taught, and that sort of philosophy.
Thank you for your talk. Sir, I just want your opinion on this. I feel, after being studying both in private and in public universities in India, I feel that the private universities are strong-arming the public universities to be the torchbearer of quality and solve the problems, where they do very questionable things like bachelor's in nanotech, which I feel is not possible to do a nanotech in 4 years understanding. So does the NAP address this education for business idea of the private universities?
It only does so in a very indirect way, which is something that will prescribe finances and so forth. So the overall structure has been given that this is how it shall be legislated. The practical aspect of it is yet to be determined. I should point out, probably many of you don't know or have not thought about explicitly. Today, the University Grants Commission, which legislates BAs and MAs and all the standard degrees, there are something like 160 different flavors of bachelors that you can get in our country, including regulations in Oriental studies. there's just the number of degrees that are there in India today has to be read to be believed, including, questionable degrees. Forget about this thing, a Bachelor of Homeopathic Sciences, and other such, degrees of questionable merit, but including nanotech.
Yeah, last question.
Nanobiotech.
And my question is regarding the entrance. Like in India, we have different entrance examinations. IIT has its own, MSET has its own, Delhi University. So even if you want to apply and appear for all those exams, it's quite impossible. Whereas if you see in the West, there's a common process, but there's not a common exam. So do you see any such step being taken through in national education policy, or is that even practical for us to think about something like that in this current scenario?
See, my personal feel, but given a country like ours, the low amount of investment in actual institutions, I don't see an easy way out. I think the centralized university entrance test is an unmitigated disaster. The CUET. It is a disaster in terms of its implementation. What it can do is just impossible. I don't have a practical way out because nobody seems to trust the school leaving boards. The school board has also been negated by our entire process. I don't have a satisfactory answer to it, except that I don't feel that more examinations is a way of determining determining access. It would be easy to say that universities should view their entrant pool and evaluate them and so on, but the supply is very, very limited and the demand is far too high. So again, there is no easy answer to this. Even the national testing agency that has been set up, it's again a central process, but they are not a testing agency, they are just an administering agency. So again, we are left with very few things that we can appeal to, other than to make yet another exam. It's an unsatisfactory situation.
Sorry, I did say last, but one more person.
The one way to do that is by introducing courses like MBBS in Hindi. And last week, I think they have started doing that in Madhya Pradesh. And how do you think, or what would be the, I don't want to use the word consequences, but I would. What would be the consequences of teaching a very professional course like MBBS in Hindi? Like, would it just alienate us from the rest of the world, from the research world of the West or the English speaking? Because if you see, majority of the research is happening in English speaking nations and like not here. Like we might be just researching that research or something like that. So would it just alienate us, and like would it really solve the brain drain issue? Thank you.
Or any other subject in a regional or local language starts with the problem that you don't have enough learning material, not pedagogic material in that language. The difficulty of translating an English text into Hindi, I have done not a whole text, but I have done a few examinations translating the English exam into a Hindi exam, and
adding to your point, they have just translated around 3 books for the entire MBBS course, and they've started the course.
Because that is difficult, now that means that the kind of learning they will have is very limited. See, we live in a world which is highly unequal. In many, many ways it's unequal, but one of them is that English has become the dominant language of international currency in some sense. And I don't know what we will get by denying that. Even in our own country, it is easier for me to talk to you in English, however poor my English might be and however poor your understanding of English might be. It's much better than my speaking in worse Telugu or non-existent Telugu, worse Hindi, and you're having to understand me. This is all. So let's get a move on. Life is not long enough to just invest in translating, and then worrying about it. We've got problems to solve. So I think that somehow is not addressing the issue. I think we should be expansive enough to allow for communication in more than one language. This is in fact our great strength. We can speak simultaneously in 3 languages, meaning we have an understanding of at least 3 languages in India, right? Or at least 2. And I think that we should allow for communication in all these modes is fine. But formal discussion, we need one to agree on. I don't care if it's going to be Hindi, let's make sure that everything that's of value gets translated into Hindi. It's just difficult.
So one last question, sir.
Yeah.
So we have many upcoming universities and the fees is quite high, and top of it the quality is very poor. So what is your take on that? So substandard colleges are getting a university permission, so how can they do that?
You'll see more of it. Should be more and more universities, and the only way to do it is that if colleges get converted to universities. Again, I think that without our own involvement in this process at a fundamental level, it's going to be very, very difficult to ensure this.